Welcome to Red Pill Nation. I'm Scott Veritas, and today I'm speaking with Sidni Standard. Sidni is a former Democrat who left the party after the 2016 election and is now an independent supporting Donald Trump. You can check out her self-titled YouTube channel where she frequently posts about politics, current events, and life in general. And you can follow her on Twitter at Sidni Standard. Today we'll talk about her walk-away story, the 2020 election, identity politics, and more. Sidni, thank you for joining us on Red Pill Nation.
Thank you, Scott. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk to you. I've had a walk-away Dem on the show before, and of course, you are now an independent. Gracie West was actually my first guest, and I'm having some more from that cohort. And of course, it's a cohort to which I belong as well, also a former Democrat turned independent. And I want to start today's show kind of at the, I guess, what is the beginning of that story, which is that, of course, at one point, as someone who walked away from the Democratic Party, you were at one point a Democrat, and I believe that was more so when you were in college, when you were very young. And I think, by the way, from listening to the timelines you've laid out in your videos, we're about the same age. So our stories kind of track together. I was in my senior year of college during the 2016 election.
Yep.
But okay, yeah, so awesome. So we sort of had almost the same exact experience. So tell me a little bit about how you ended up initially being a leftist and being a Democrat to begin with.
So when I graduated from high school, I knew really nothing about politics. When I was a senior, maybe when I was a junior, I remember my teacher in high school had actually signed us all up. Oh, no, it was when I was a senior in high school. She signed pretty much the whole class up to be registered voters. So I kind of just registered as a Democrat. I just automatically did that. And then I didn't really think about it. So I go to college, I went to a women's college, so it's super lefty there. And not only was I at a women's college, but I was in a town that was nicknamed Lesbianville. We had we had a rainbow crosswalk in the town, and people referred to it as the Smith bubble. And boy, was it a bubble. So there was just so much going on at that campus, and it was super political, but it was only political left-leaning. So everything that was pushed was just all this leftist ideology that we see right now. So naturally, I basically gravitated towards that. And I remember when I was a senior, it was the election of Donald Trump. And that night we were all watching in our dorm rooms, who's going to win. We thought Hillary was going to win. We were like, oh my God, the first female president.
Sounds very familiar.
We're like, the first female president, it's going to be so great because, we were watching the news and we heard that she's going to win. It's going to be a no-brainer. So in our minds, we're thinking, oh yeah, she's just going to win. And then as the night went on, she wasn't winning. And it ended up going to Donald Trump. The next day at my campus, kid you not, yes, you would have thought that someone died. Yeah. Everybody was in black. The school held a meeting for the school to come and voice their opinions and their frustrations over the election of Donald Trump. I remember at that time, I was like, oh my God, I just lost all my rights as a Black woman, blah, 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 blah. It was so extreme. And that following day, I actually went to Boston because Boston was about an hour and 10 minutes from where I was in Northampton, Massachusetts. And I went and marched in the streets. I was saying Black Lives Matter. I was saying all this stuff because you're pretty much taught at my school, I can really only speak for my school, to protest and to care so deeply about these issues. And that's how I became this radical leftist. I hated, I had a terrible relationship with my father at the time because I thought he was a misogynist, even though he's always been there for me. And it was just radical thinking, really.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you say about how you were in an environment where you were encouraged to be political and everything was highly charged and politicized, but it only goes in one direction, which is, frankly, it's BS. It's a total double standard where it's like, oh, we want you to be political, we want you to be activists, but don't be conservative, don't be centrist, don't be classically liberal. You have to be, progressive in the new kind of woke sense. And they fill your heads with these ideas of identity politics. I remember. When I first started college, I felt rather insulted, even though at the time I was a liberal Democrat. We had to go to this, it was like a short theater production, basically trying to teach men not to rape. It was showing a scenario that was a date rape scenario. And it was don't do this, this is bad. And this is something that I've heard stories of from a lot of other people at university and just been even at the time when I was like pretty hardcore Democrat, I was 18 years old. I was like, this is insulting. Like, you don't have to tell me not to do this. And it
Yeah.
was just so insane. And that was all the way back in like 2013 before things had even
Mm-hmm.
gotten really crazy. Because as you pointed out in your story, after the 2016 election, something just snapped. I mean, it just completely snapped. So tell me a little bit about how in the aftermath to that, you start, what made you first start to question, what's kind of the timeline of when you first started to question your place as a liberal Democrat and started to maybe move away from it, and what was the cause of that?
Well, I would say it didn't start until honestly after I started to really heal myself,
Hmm.
which was definitely like maybe a year, year and a half, 2 years after I graduated college. And I realized that like I had a lot of stuff going on in my head that was really detrimental to me, like to my success, to everything. And as I started to unpack that, as I started to meditate more, journal, read the Bible, like just it like connect more with source, like with God, not in a religious way, but for a second it was in a religious way. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized that that's too dogmatic and it almost
Mm.
was restricting me and I didn't like that. So I kind of overcame that. And then I started to like, once I had like fully come to a point where I felt healed and whatever, then I could think logically. So then I was able to, I had heard an interview that Candace Owens had did with Joe Rogan. And I had heard it before, but at that time I wasn't really ready to receive it, right? And this is after Andrew Yang was just, pushed to the side basically by the Democratic Party. And he was the only candidate that I actually liked on the Democratic side. I thought he was the most personable and what he seemed like he was coming from a good place.
And
And
not
then,
super woke,
yeah,
which
and
I
not
liked. I
super
actually
woke.
voted for Andrew Yang as well.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, he seems cool. He sounds like a regular dude. I liked his wife. She like seemed like a strong woman. She said that she was like basically like raped by her OBGYN. And
Hmm.
like that takes a lot of heart to come
Yeah.
out and say that. And I was like, man, I really respect that. And then, they were just kind of pushed to the side. And then he was like, oh, I'm gonna endorse Joe Biden. I was like, this is kind of weird that everybody's doing is just endorsing this dude, just falling with the party line. So, then I started to really look into conservative people. So Candace was kind of my red pill, but then I started to look into other people like Charlie Kirk, the Rubin Report. Now, more so the people I listen to are like Tim Pool, Charlie Kirk, ABL, Anthony Brian Logan,
Hmm.
the Officer Tatum sometimes as well, and just like Steven Crowder, like all these random people. What's her name? Caitlin Bennett. I love Liberty Hangout. I think
Hmm.
it's so entertaining, better than any TV that's on right now. So these are the people I kind of started to follow. And I remember when I was in college, I was told these people were evil. And like that's when I was in that very foggy headspace, right? So
Yeah.
now that I'm in this logical place, I'm listening to these people. I'm like, what they're saying makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about getting yourself to a more healthy and logical mindset personally, because the way that I view a lot of what's occurring with what I call woke supremacy, which is kind of the catch-all term I use for intersectional feminism, Black Lives Matter, all of the sort of identity movements that are causing the left to completely go insane. What I see is large groups of very mentally unhealthy people. And it varies from the most mentally unhealthy are criminally insane. We're talking Antifa, we're talking the more
Mm-hmm.
extreme rioting going on. And then you also have people in the media who they might not go out physically attacking people, but they will be rather vicious online. We were just talking before the show today about how Ibram Kendi, who's a big, I'm going to put in quotes, anti-racist activist, was attacking Amy Coney Barrett, who's looks like she's about to become a SCOTUS justice, saying that like he was implying that she adopted two Black children as like a virtue signal, which is just such a gross attack. And that is something that comes from, I assume, of Ibram Kendi. From hearing that, I go, I think there's something wrong with him. Like it's not
Yeah.
mentally healthy to look at a woman who happens to be white, who has adopted two Black children, and immediately think that there's some kind of ulterior motive. And so
Yep.
what you said really speaks to me, and also because it was part of my experience when I was in college. For a lot of personal reasons that I haven't talked about a ton on the channel, but I was also in a mentally unhealthy place and I felt victimized. Even though I am a white male, I always thought about like, oh, I'm a millennial and the boomers ruined the economy. And I still have some resentment of things that were done to the economy in the 20th century, but that's a whole nother topic. But I basically made myself into a victim, you know, because that's kind of where you go when you're in an unhealthy mindset. It doesn't matter if you're a white male, a black woman, or any other group. You find a way to say everything is someone else's fault. And that is kind of the first rule of being a progressive now, is nothing can ever be within your control. You have to constantly be in this place of extreme mental unhealth. So I really, really like that point that you made about how the biggest aspect of your red pill journey was working on yourself and getting things right with you and your family, your father, it sounds like. And that's great to hear. I'm curious about kind of another aspect of the red pill journey that always comes up, which is, what was it like for you personally and socially? Like, what was kind of the impact with your friends, with your family? Maybe some, you know, I'm sure there is always some positive things that materialize. Like, you've discovered a whole new network of people. You're on this show in part because of your journey, but I'm sure there's also some negative interactions that you had. That's kind of always the case.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
So I basically made a post on my Facebook page, not even really thinking about it. I was just kind of like, oh, whatever. I was proud to be a Trump supporter at this point. So I literally made a post that said, proud to be a Trump supporter, love to all. I got so much hate.
Yeah.
So much hate. And the most amount of hate that I got was actually from other Black people. And I always kind of talk about this. I feel like there's this narrative that white people are super racist. And I'm not, like, first of all, you can't make absolutes like that. It's just, you're going to be wrong if you make any sort of absolute. What I will say is that the most racist people I've ever met in my life have been other Black people who have said, you have to think this way because you look this way. And I'm like, what? This is strange. You know, it was a pretty crazy journey.
Yeah.
And you know, I have love for them. I understand that they are in a mentally unhealthy place, so I'm not mad at them, but it's just, to see people's true colors come out, it's kind of sad, you know, when all these people who you thought were your friends, all colors, right, they are just attacking you so viciously because you have a difference of opinion. It just shows how much work, how much healing this country needs to do. And that's kind of why I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to keep doing me. And all these words that they throw at you, it's just a means to silence you. And I'm not going to stand for it.
Yeah, and that viciousness that you're referring to, that you got when you came out as a Trump supporter and as someone who was changing their views, which is generally a healthy thing when you get new information, that viciousness is one of the things I try to point out to people, is it's engineered by a legacy media. And at this point, the whole Democratic Party, a college environment, kind of as we were referring to, and big tech. I always kind of refer to it as the big four. It's Democratic Party, the legacy media, universities, and big tech. They engineer an environment where, like you were saying, minorities and women in particular, and to an extent even younger white males, all feel like, by virtue of either their race, their youth, or their gender, or their sexuality, they do it with gay people, they do it with religion, with Muslim people, anyone who's not an older white male, they say, you have to be a Democrat. If you are not, you are evil and bad. And they propagandize you to believe that anyone who is not that is evil. And the thing that confuses people the most is seeing a young Black woman who is not a Democrat any longer, or anyone else who belongs to any minority group, even me being a white male, as just like a younger guy. It baffles people that I'm not super progressive. I also happen to be Jewish, so that confuses people. It's like, if you're not the stereotypical old white straight Christian male, it just really sets people off in a way that is almost more vicious than what they send the way of sort of the people that they're like, oh, well, I expect them to be a Republican, because it goes against, I was talking about this on the show recently. People's narratives are so rigid on the left that they can't withstand any challenge to it without going completely nuts. Whereas people like you or myself, we've sort of gone through this process of realizing that a narrative that we had at one point was wrong. And that's one of the things I always look for in people I want to talk with, is, have they changed their minds about things? Because that shows that they're able to sort of withstand a challenge to their narrative and have interesting, nuanced discussions. But again, back to my original point, we're living in an environment where these big, very powerful institutions are discouraging us from having that nuance. And they're they're basically, this is another thing I talked about on another show recently, they're sort of mentally torturing people. I mean, they're showing them this propaganda, they're showing them videos out of context of, like, here's a white cop shooting a Black person. Forget about the context, forget about what caused it. Here's, something misogynistic, something homophobic, something transphobic. We're not going to tell you anything that could maybe contextualize it and make it feel a little more nuanced, and maybe you don't feel as concerned. And there's sort of this mental torture process. And
Yes.
I have you ever seen the movie Clockwork Orange?
I have not.
Okay, there's a scene, because this is the thing that it made me think of. There's this very famous scene in that movie where they clip the main character's eyes open and they make him watch these scenes of ultra violent material to sort of mentally destroy him and almost like lobotomize him. And it just
They
reminds me of what the
demoralize.
media does. Yeah.
They demoralize the public.
Yeah.
So now they're weak, and now they're like, oh my God. And then they get these emotional triggers and they're like, oh my God, activate,
And it's so abusive. Like, and so I've just been thinking about, and this is something I always try to kind of make a pattern on this show, like what we do to fight back against these institutions that are propagandizing and abusing us mentally constantly. And it's escalating and getting worse. I mean, the past 3 months in particular have just been, I really hate to use this language, but it's just the way that I feel about what's been happening. I look at what the legacy media is doing and I go, they are like, whether they realize it or not, they're like fomenting a race war. And it's like, no one wants this. Like
no
they're
one.
making, yeah.
Absolutely no one wants it. And the thing is, if you go about in your everyday life, most people are just living their lives. They're nice. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to have problems with people. I think the biggest enemy of the people is the media, is Hollywood pushing these narratives, right? If I think about this, I'm like, why do people have these prejudices of what people are like? It's because if you think about Hollywood, the media, what roles are people of darker skin tones always cast in? The criminal roles, right? So if that's what you're seeing in the media over time, you're going to subconsciously start to think that every single person of this skin tone is a criminal. Whether you make that connection or not, it's going to happen. So it's like, this is what we're up against. It's really, I think this is a culture war more than anything. And this is why, we're going to have to take back, well, honestly, maybe even get rid of Hollywood, build something new, take out the mainstream media. I think, YouTube's great because so many people aren't necessarily tuning into that mainstream narrative anymore, and they're going to things like YouTube. But again, there's those liberal pockets of New York, of California, of these major cities where people want to be woke, right? And they just talk to people in that bubble, that echo chamber.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about replacing institutions. That's another pattern on this show, and in the commentary that I give, is that we need to, honestly, at first I was like, maybe we can sort of, it's funny because this is sort of how the progressives always have their debates as well. It's about reforming versus replacing institutions. And it's kind of come on to the other side, the resistance to woke supremacy as well. Because at first I was like, oh, I can work within the democratic establishment, which I was a part of, and I can try to make them see reason. This was Dave Rubin's experience as well. My journey tracks really well with his in a lot of ways. But there was just, for a while it was, and also the media, which at one point I wanted to be a journalist. I mean, it's no wonder I do a show like this. It's like I wanted to be a commentator, right? So, I was like, these are all institutions that I respected at some point, and that at their core, the idea, right? So like the idea of the media being a truth agent, informing people, good idea. The idea of the academy being a place where you're intellectually stimulated, good idea. These are all good ideas, and they've been completely infected and bastardized by woke supremacy. And so I love what you're saying about actually kind of getting to the point where actually just considering replacing the institutions entirely. Like, let them burn to the ground. They're burning themselves to the ground. Nobody believes the media. Nobody believes the media anymore. Very few people, almost even a lot of the most hardcore liberal people I know, I'll be like, MSNBC and CNN are bullshit, right? And they're like, yeah. They're like, I go to other, there are other sources that they go to just because they know to kind of take that with a grain of salt. But I want to ask you kind of specifically on the notion of replacing institutions. We discussed a little bit about how I think that the way that the media is going to get replaced is sort of coming into focus with the rise of people like Joe Rogan and figures like Dave Rubin and the alternative media. But one that's a little bit harder to quantify or to specify how it might happen. And I want to speak to you because our university experiences were so similar, having been in university in the same time. So what do you think are some of the potential ways that the sort of university monopoly on young people's minds can be challenged. Because in our cohort, kind of I think we're both kind of the borderline Gen Z millennial. We're kind of on that
Yes.
line.
I
But
was
in
born
that cohort,
95.
yes, same here. So that cohort is very much college educated. It's like
Mhm.
over half at least go to college, and the vast majority graduate. But in any case, they're exposed to this propaganda, and it's spread. It's crazy. I think when we went in, it was like a long time ago, it used to only be in the grievance studies. It was just women and black
Yeah.
studies. And then it expanded to the social sciences at the beginning of when we went to school. And then a little after we graduated, it actually got to the hard sciences when James Damore, that whole Google thing happened. And then all of a sudden engineers and scientists are talking about, equity in engineering and math as what, 2 + 2 = 5 or whatever. But in any case, what do you think are some of the possible solutions to the college monopoly on young people's minds? Are there any alternative ways to convince people to maybe go somewhere else, or to at least challenge the universities to once again become places that focus on truth seeking and true intellectual stimulation?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with not everybody needs to go to college. I think college has become so incredibly expensive, and it's become embedded in our culture. Like, you have to go to college, you have to go to college. Otherwise, what are you doing? It's bad. I remember when I went to college, I felt like I had to go to college, but also I had to go to a really good college. And it's like that elitism, right, that they kind of instill in you. And I think it really all starts with the culture. It's about, there's so many different programs out there. I know of this app that's called Career Karma, and it connects people to these coding boot camps.
Hmm.
And there's actually a shortage of jobs in coding. So it's like, if people, rather than go to college, go for skills that they can then get a job in pretty immediately, I think that would solve a lot of the issues that people have today. Because I've heard people bring this up, that people don't own anything. So it's like, it's so easy for someone to go burn down something because they have no connection to it. They don't own anything. So they're mad, they're in debt, all this stuff. And they're just like, I want to burn it all down. And it's like, do you kind of blame them? I get it. So I think if we point people in the direction of trade schools, let's make plumbing cool again, right? Plumbers
Yeah.
make up over 6 figures, right? And carpenters and a lot of these skilled jobs that, I don't think you can ever completely automate. I think you're always going to need people to do those things. If you're a pottery maker, or if you make stuff, sell it on Etsy, there's ways that you can become a successful person in America without having to actually go to college. And I think we're missing that mostly because of the culture, right? We just have to, we have to make, financial education like one of the most important things that we actually teach kids. Because I know for myself, I'm learning that, and I kind of had to go through some bad experiences to learn it. And it's almost like the system kind of sets you up to be in debt. And I think we have to address that.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about how there's potential here, in that I think people are just starting to wake up to the fact that college maybe isn't the best choice. And like you said, there's very much was this cultural meme right up until, I think it was really right up until we went to college. We kind of missed it by that much. Of there was this idea right up until when we started that if you don't go to college, you're a loser. And if you go to a community college or a college that isn't particularly prestigious, you're like still kind of you're like 50% loser. It's like the better college you go to, the less of a loser you are. It's all about college,
Yep.
and it's all about the credentialism. And I think that started to wane a bit, specifically as it came into view for people, the lack of economic value, frankly. I mean, it's all about
Yeah.
people's self-interest. The lack of economic value in getting a degree in most places. I kind of got like a liberal arts type degree, and it wasn't particularly helpful. I mean, it was a degree, right? At the end of the day, for a lot of jobs, you need a degree, but it doesn't really matter unless it's like engineering or medicine or something like that. But in any case, people are seeing this, and they're also seeing, like you were saying, the overwhelming cost and the debt that they go into and how crushing that is. I'm fortunate insofar that I had a little bit of debt coming out of college, but I didn't have like 6-figure or anything like that.
Same.
Some people end up they're in $150,000 in debt, and
They
they
have
got
a
a PhD in
mortgage.
gender studies. Yeah.
Yeah.
And an associate professor of gender studies might make $45,000 a year. So that, it's like, and then you got expenses. I think there's potential here where people have woken up to at least kind of this entry point for the conversation, which is, hey, this isn't working. Like, whether or not you agree with me politically, the college thing is falling apart just as an economic factor. It doesn't work. It doesn't connect.
Nope.
And it happened very quickly. And then the other factor that is, gives me some hope on this subject is, you mentioned trade school, which is great. And for a lot of people, it works. There's a lot of people where you see them at college and you go, they might do better in trade school. Like, they don't want to be in this kind of environment. You can just tell. And they would do perfectly well in trade school. They could be an electrician or make $80,000 a year when they're 23 years old,
Exactly.
And the thing is, though, there's another thing, which is you can learn stuff on YouTube. Like, I'm not the best video editor in the world, but what I know about video editing, I learned from YouTube. It's like, there's so much potential to, I think the thing that really excites me is the thought of, and I think Jordan Peterson talked about this at one point in one of his videos. He said there's kind of the mollycoddle, the coddling version of the university, which is really sort of expanded on in Jonathan Haidt's Coddling the American Mind, that book. But then there's also Truth University, a university where you actually are going through intellectual rigor. And really, I think one of the things that's kind of been that sort of replaced the university is the intellectual dark web, is sort of this group of people that we've become associated with, whether it's Tim Pool or Jordan Peterson or other people we've mentioned, where they're stimulating young minds in a way that no university can. You learn so much more in a 2-hour Jordan Peterson lecture than you do in 2 months of being a gender studies major.
Yep.
And so there's so much potential here. And I always try to encourage people to think about ways to challenge these institutions, because they are tearing our society apart.
Yeah, I mean, quite literally they are.
Yeah. It's getting to a point where the last conversation I had on this show, it sort of became a sticking point of just how powerful they are and how they kind of work together. Like, the media can call on the university to, let's bring on this expert in, I remember they called on an expert. He was like a historian of medicine, to tell Jordan Peterson on air that, like, biological sex doesn't exist. But there's that veneer of credentialism. And so people are like, oh, this guy's legit. And I think that challenging that, it's not only one of the things that is a point of optimism and hope for what I collectively refer to as like the resistant, whether it's the dissident right or the intellectual dark web or classical liberals, conservatives. It's not just a point of hope for them, but it's a point of excitement. It's kind of this new exciting thing where, it's an experiment. It could blow up in our faces, but if we try to basically, at this point, we have nothing to lose. These institutions are so rotten. That's kind of been my attitude, is that universities, like, they're so bad. I mean, I feel like we got the last of, like, the slightly sane, like, before Trump was elected, there was a little bit of, like, I still remember my professors being like, hey, we have to respect conservative points of view. There was a veneer, at least where I went to school, of equality and actually respecting people with different viewpoints. And then I feel like after Trump was elected was the snapping moment where every institution collectively lost its mind, including the media. And so it's like, fuck them. Like, there's no other way to say it. It's just like, let's get rid of them. Like, and it kills me because, these are things that started as good ideas. But I think also the other thing is the internet has just changed the way all of this works. And it's like, the internet is such a massive, reformation for human society. We might as well completely revamp everything. I mean, I've said on the show before, I think there should be an internet bill of rights, and that we should be supporting free speech on the internet. Yeah.
Totally agree. I think it would solve a lot of problems because there's just so much censorship, and especially of people who have ideas like ours, which I don't even think is like that radical. It's just common sense. But what happens? You get censored, you get shadow banned on places like Twitter. And it's crazy. People don't even want to have a conversation with you if you're not echoing the radical left. It's insane. I think I point a lot of this to the fact that in order for people to accept new ideas, they really have to die to themselves. They have to have an ego death. And most people aren't prepared to do that.
Yeah, that's another guest on this show called it an identity quake, and that there's only certain people that can withstand an identity quake. And I think that that's where, if we're talking about reforming institutions, the primary education system needs to teach people how to handle a challenge to their narrative, because even young children have a narrative. A narrative is a universal concept. It's a story you tell yourself to orient yourself in the world. Even 5-year-olds have a narrative. It might be as simple as like, I like cookies and I want to go home and play video games all day, but like, that's a narrative, right?
Yeah.
It's something that sort of is the overarching story of how you're living your life. And if people can't accept challenges to that narrative, can't experience an identity quake without just hardening. That's what people, there's sort of two different responses. There's the response that we had to our identity quakes, which is let's actually take in some new information via sources like Candace Owens, or for me, Christina Hoff Sommers was a really big thing, Larry Elder, who I'm sure you're familiar with. And then actually reevaluate some of our biases, some of our past actions. There are things that I am ashamed of. During the 2016 cycle, when I called out all Trump supporters and said, like, you're all enabling this misogynistic, racist person, and that says something about you. I totally look back on that now, and anyway, all of this is to say, when I talked about the primary education system, it's because people need to learn how to look back and say, I was wrong. And say, I need to make some adjustments. Whereas I think what our society encourages people to do is what it says is, if you say sorry or you say I was wrong, that means you're not credible anymore. That means you're going in the trash bin. And we see this with cancel culture, which is another great thing for us to discuss, which is that people are basically told when they screw up, when they say something offensive, when they do something that they can't, if they apologize, if they go back on it, what they're seeing is it just gets like, there's no acknowledgement to, like, it doesn't work. Like apologizing, saying you're wrong, saying you want to do better. It's led to this meme, in the resistance of like, never apologize to the mob, which is sad because apologies are a good thing in theory, but because we live in this era of mob rule and cancel culture, we can't engage in one of the primary activities of compromise in human society, which is apologizing and acknowledging when you're wrong. It's a bad situation to be in.
Yeah, and it's just like, how does one live in this society, right? It makes it so hard for you to, like, I don't have any of my friends that I used to have. And it's sad that, you're friends with these people and you shared moments with them, and all of a sudden, because you have a difference of opinion, now you're canceled. It's like, was that how deep our friendship was? It's pretty crazy. And like I said, this goes back to the ego of like being so attached to your beliefs and ideas and just not wavering on anything that contradicts that. It shows that people are very immature, I would say.
Yeah, I think people are encouraged to be childish in a way that is very bizarre. You see the Twitter activists and everyone just act in a very like high school way. I mean, what we were talking about earlier, Amy Coney Barrett being attacked for having adopted Black children is just so bizarre and immature. And it's something that like maybe a 15-year-old would think. And an adult should think that and be like, that's a stupid idea. Like, there's no reason for me to assume that this woman adopted her children, like without any other information, to just make that assumption. That's like a very, it feels like it's someone spreading a rumor in the hallway, like, oh, I hear Amy only adopted her children because she wants to be seen as woke or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure Amy Coney Barrett, the like staunchly conservative appeals court justice, wants to be seen as woke. Like, it's just
Mean
very
Girls
high
coming
school.
to life.
Yes. It's really, and it's a shame for those of us that want to have adult conversations. Like I've always felt like, and I'm sure you felt this way as well, a lot of us feel like we've always been a little mature for our age, and we've been relishing the chance to become an adult and have these adult conversations, these nuanced conversations, the kind of conversation we're having right now that I try to have on the show. And then we get to adulthood, and then all of a sudden everyone goes insane and people are acting like children. I mean, it's very, members of Congress are acting like children. I mean, what is, Rashida Tlaib saying, impeach the motherfucker? That's the equivalent, I think, of like, I remember there was this trend a few years back. It was mostly younger dudes would do it, but young women especially would like flip off the camera when taking pictures. And it was just this sort of like, like edgy thing to do. That's what I see when I see Rashida Tlaib saying we're going to impeach the motherfucker. It's just like, it's so needlessly like, oh, it's the progressives version of being edgy, when really that is the cool thing to do. Like, there's nothing actually edgy or anti-establishment about flipping off a camera or saying you're going to impeach Donald Trump.
It's just so immature. It's like, these people are in power.
Yeah.
You elected these people and they're acting like kids. Like, I could do a better job of running the country than these people, because I'd have more respect for people than these people have. And it's just really sad. And at the end of the day, we kind of have to look at ourselves in the mirror, because we let this happen in a sense, right? We let them get away with it. We voted these people in. I mean, obviously we're younger, but as a society, we've let this happen. And we haven't really, there hasn't been major checks and balances on these institutions. And I looked up a statistic, and 90% of the media is actually owned by 6 companies. So that seems really off. It seems like it'd be really easy to control the minds of the people if only 6 companies own 90% of the media. I have a problem with that. And I wish more people would be up in arms about that, but I think most people don't even know. And I think especially with this Breonna Taylor case, which, you know, it's sad that the young lady lost her life.
Mm-hmm.
However, it was not an instance where there was a no-knock warrant. It was an instance where the police knocked. They knocked, they said that they were coming in, they came in, her boyfriend at the time, Kenneth Walker, shot at the police officers first.
Yes.
And they fired back. It's like, put yourself in that situation. If someone fires at you first, you're probably going to fire back if you have a gun.
And that is the procedure, actually. This is why they were not indicted, is that if you're fired upon, the one officer was indicted on the fact that he fired without a clear line of sight,
which
was
sense.
Considered reckless because I think he shot through a curtain and it went into another apartment and it whizzed by one of her neighbors' heads. The individual who shot Breonna Taylor shot her unintentionally in an attempt to return fire at her boyfriend. Now, these details that you are bringing up are details that everyone should know. But they do not know. They talk about the original reporting on these things is always so far from the truth.
Yeah.
So like with Breonna Taylor, we were told basically that this young black woman lost her life. She was sleeping in her bed. There was a no-knock raid on her apartment. The police came in, guns blazing, and shot her to death. Which sounds horrific. I mean, if that happened, I'd be out in the streets, right? If I lived in Louisville and somebody did that to my neighbor, to somebody in my community.
And it could be any skin color, any gender.
Right.
You'd be up in arms.
Yeah. And you know, then the facts come out and you learn that, yes, this was absolutely tragic, but it was an unintentional death in a situation where I think it's legitimate to say that there were maybe some logistical problems in the planning of the raid and that somebody in the police department needs to be reprimanded but the officers they were serving at the address on the warrant in the way that they were instructed to do. And they were shot at and they returned fire. And that's of course, I always wonder, what is the alternative? What do people want them to do? Just sit there and be like, well, we're getting shot at. I mean, like, let's go run away now. I mean, like, so, and then we see this as well with the more that comes out about the Jacob Blake thing, I'm just like, holy, so we were told that Jacob Blake was breaking up a fight at his ex-girlfriend's house or something. And when in reality, she had accused him of rape the previous day. And, you know, innocent until proven guilty. I wasn't there. I guess I don't know what happened, but she had accused him of rape. There was a warrant out for sexual assault. He goes to her apartment, I think the following day, and he starts harassing her. And she calls the cops. Then he steals her keys, pulls out a knife on the cops, punches the cops, walks towards her car. This was the thing we didn't know. Her car with her kids inside. I know they are his biological children, but I've made the point. I don't think, based on the details, that I know that he had custody of them. They're really her children. They are his biological children, but they're really her kids. So he's getting in her car with her kids. And then finally we get the final detail today, which is the police officer says, as is predictable, he says, I thought he was going to kidnap this woman's children with a knife in her car and that he could harm them. So I shot him. Because he wasn't responding to the commands when 3 police officers are pointing guns. And so it's just like, but again, people still believe that basically this guy went to break up a fight and that he was getting in what they often think was his vehicle with his kids inside, you know, just to check on them. And they don't know any of these details that if you knew them, any reasonable person would say like, okay, you got to shoot that guy. I mean, it's terrible. It's awful. Nobody wants anyone to get shot, but there's no other option if you're that cop at that point.
Yeah.
And it's not like they didn't,
Oh, sorry, go.
No, I was just going to say, it's not like they didn't try to use other methods.
Yeah.
That's all.
And again, with the George Floyd case, it was not a racialized situation. These two had a relationship prior. And it's like, as soon as it fits the narrative of like Black person, white cop, then all of a sudden people get up in arms. They don't even look to the facts of the case. It's literally an emotional trigger for people. And most of these situations, they're not racial at all. They're actually just like situations that happen. And I think the fact that people racialize these situations and they go into, oh my God, this is the narrative that's happening. Black people, Black Lives Matter, all this stuff. It just speaks to honestly how racist the left is. If you see a racial situation in every single thing, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, how is my perspective on the world affecting how I see everything else? Because perception is reality. So you kind of have to think about your own internalized racism that you have for people and think about, if I were to maybe like deal with that, would my view of the world change? And I think for a lot of people, it would. I know for me, it did.
Yeah, people need to check themselves for, they say they're anti-racist or they're anti-misogyny, they're feminist or whatever, and then they don't realize they're just being taught another way to be sexist or racist, which is any lens that you're given or narrative that you're given to use in life where you are constantly thinking about these things, whether it's because you think white people are bad or black people are bad, either way, whether you're in the KKK or you're in Antifa, either way, you're thinking about the world in a very unhealthy way,
Yes.
and in a way that is inherently anti-liberal. I mean, I'm sure you've heard from Dave Rubin and other figures how there's nothing liberal about looking at the world through these lenses. There's nothing conservative or liberal. It's this whole other category of woke where we're asked to, I mean, the whole idea of intersectionality is oppressor oppressed. It's a binary thinking system that makes us think about the world in a way that inevitably makes us racist. It inevitably makes us sexist. And the fact that people can't see that, it's just a damn shame. And I think that, now that these ideas have been dissected by people like James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson, I think it's time for us to start pointing this out to people. I'm considering doing a video on this channel. Sometimes I do video essays, and I want to do a video essay where I'm like, Ibram X. Kendi is a racist. Because it's like, I'm starting to see him as kind of like, he's the Anita Sarkeesian of BLM. Anita Sarkeesian was this big feminist figure who kind of became like the figurehead for annoying feminism. And Ibram Kendi is, I think, the figurehead for racism disguised as anti-racism. And I think that if we don't start using those terms, this is why I use a term like woke supremacy instead of social justice. I use terms like this, and I say that Ibram Kendi is a racist, is because if we don't start calling a spade and using things that may sound pejorative and nasty but are just true, then we're going to be locked in a battle where we're using a water pistol and they're using a Gatling gun. It's like we're coming in saying like, oh, some of these tactics are, anti-liberal, and they're calling us racist. It's like if we don't also engage in the use of language that is appropriate, because Ibram Kendi is racist. He thinks all white people have, these similar traits. That's prejudice. That's what that is. If we don't start sort of calling a spade, saying woke supremacy, I've had to think about, I've considered saying maybe instead of the Black Lives Matter movement, we start calling it the white guilt movement, because that's what it's literally really about, right? So this is something I want to ask you about, is just kind of what you think of the language that is used, and how one of the criticisms I have of sort of what I collectively refer to as the resistance is that we don't use, we just disarm ourselves by almost being a little bit too civil and a little bit too thoughtful. It's like, yes, I love being thoughtful and civil, but we have to identify the people who are just really bad actors acting in bad faith and call them what they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think people don't like bluntness. I think PC culture has really ruined everything. Comedy is dead. Nothing's funny anymore. I think the most comedy I found is honestly on the right. They've become funny again because they're picking fun at the ridiculousness of what's going on. And it's just like, you can't really win with these people. Even if you're blunt, even if you're authentic, unless you're bowing the knee to the mob, you're an enemy. You're enemy number one, actually. And I think critical race theory plays a huge role in that. And critical race theory is inherently racist. If you believe that there's a power structure that exists and that only white people can be racist, that misses the point. Like, I thought racism was just if you have a prejudice for someone because of their skin color. I didn't think it was anything else other than that. But apparently you have to have this economic advantage and whatever. And also, how can you even say that there are many people in this country of all skin colors who are wealthy? So for you to say that all Black people are poor, that's pretty racist, I think. So I think people don't even think about these things. They just they're emotionally invested in these narratives. And it's like they have blinders on. They can't even see.
It is the ultimate irony, is that people go into these things thinking, I'm going to be woke, I'm going to be tolerant, I'm going to be kind, I'm going to be anti-racist, I'm going to be anti-sexist. And they become the exact polar opposite of all of those things. I mean, they're certainly not tolerant and kind. I mean, I remember I was watching a Caitlin Bennett video once where they're just like throwing things at her and yelling the most nasty thing. And she's like, you're the tolerant, loving leftist, just like rolling her eyes like, Jesus Christ, these people, like, it shows a disconnect from reality and from morality and from kindness. Like, it's like they claim to be these things that they don't even know the meaning of. Like, to the point where, as you kind of alluded to, there's even this idea that racism is something that only white people can engage in, which is ironically in and of itself a racist idea. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, there's so many layers of irony and dubiousness and just incomprehensible gobbledygook in the actual
Yep.
ideology behind this thing, that what I've started to tell people is we need to stop picking it apart so much ideologically. I'm glad that we did that with the intellectual dark web, picking it apart, and James Lindsay and his work is great. I'm glad we did that, but now I feel like the resistance needs to move on to a new phase where it starts kind of fighting the PR battle and kind of the power politics side of this thing. And Donald Trump, to his credit, even though, you know, I've mentioned on the podcast before, I'm not supporting him in this election. I'm also not supporting Joe Biden. But to Donald Trump's credit, and honestly, it did make me consider voting for him for a minute, he has banned critical race theory everywhere that
Thank
he
God.
is legally allowed to as president. And yes, thank God for that. I mean, honestly, thank Donald Trump for that. I absolutely give him credit for that. And it pains me to say that if Joe Biden is elected, and according to the polls right now, it looks like he is likely to be, he would roll that back, just like he would roll back. I know Betsy DeVos in the education department rolled back all of the very, very anti-Fourth Amendment sexual assault mandates from the Obama administration. These are all things that would go away, you know, because the space that I'm in is kind of interesting because I can make the case for, you know, Biden or Trump because I'm sort of a centrist. But what I always say is the things with Biden is, even if he didn't have control of the Senate, just the way that he could change all of the good things Trump did within the education department with, I mean, the biggest thing is this critical race theory thing. Thank God, right before, because at least now this will be an issue. Even if Biden is elected and he rolls it back, at least it'll be in the conversation. Because I don't know, I mean, you know, and I got to give Trump credit. I don't know if other Republicans would have done this, if they would have paid attention to this issue. But that brings me to another thing I want to talk about in general, which is just the 2016 election. I saw you kind of shake your head when I said that Biden is leading in the polls. I know you are supporting Trump. As a Trump supporter, how do you feel kind of about the state of the race? We've got a debate on Tuesday. For those watching this, I record these on Saturday, so we're recording this the Saturday before the debate. So we don't know what happened at the debate yet. Regardless of when this episode comes out, although it should be out before the debate. But in any case, we've got a debate coming up. We've got 3 debates coming up. So even though Biden is ahead in the polls, we've got 3 debates. Last time, of course, Trump did overperform in the polls. This time, he is behind by quite a lot. If you're looking at the data, it is bad for Trump. But, you know, as a Trump supporter, kind of how are you feeling at the moment with about a month to go, like a month and a week to go?
Well, what I have to say to that is that the polls said that Hillary was going to win in 2016. And they did the same thing. Hillary didn't really campaign in those battleground states. She thought she had it in the bag. She got extremely arrogant. And Trump is out there. He's on the road. He's still taking care of all the stuff that's going on right now. And you know what? Those rallies are packed. The silent majority is real. I'm in that #walkaway group, and there's over like 480,000 people in that group alone. And I know for a fact that some of the numbers have been messed with. Like, they've definitely kicked some people out. And I think like there are many people who probably don't even know about the group who are going to be voting for Trump. But I think like a lot of the people who are voting for Trump, like, they aren't necessarily the people who are going to be out there and like fighting these crazy people, these crazy leftists, right? They just kind of want to go to work, you know, take care of their families, live a good life. So you're not going to see them out there being very vocal, which is why they're called the silent majority. So I actually don't believe the polls. I think the only way that Biden can win is with this whole mail-in ballot thing. And I'm sure you've heard of the fact that like they've saw that some ballots have been thrown out, right? So I think this is more so the major issue, and the misinformation campaign that the mainstream media is on. And, you know, just psychologically messing with people's minds again, making them believe that Biden's winning the polls, even though if you look at any of his rallies, they have people like 10 feet apart and there's like maybe 20, 30 people.
Sad looking.
Yeah, it's like there's no way there's excitement for this dude. He can't even remember where he is half of the time. God bless his soul. But I think it's really elder abuse by the Democratic Party. Like, why would you make this man run? You know, to me, it seems like it's more of Harris's administration more than anything else. And he's actually said it. He's made the Freudian slip and said Harris administration with Biden.
Yeah.
So it's like, who's the real candidate? We know who the real candidate is. He's just a placeholder because he's a moderate, because he was on Obama's administration. And I think if people really wise up and stop, lying to themselves, really, then they'll think more logically and realize that, like, you're being played.
Yeah.
Honestly.
That was actually the last straw with me, is that, I'm an open-minded guy. I don't really decide on who I'm going to vote for until pretty late, if the candidates are, the way that they are. And, in that I'm not particularly fond of Trump or Biden. And I was considering voting for either candidate. And the thing that was the final straw for me with Biden was his selection of Harris as a running mate. I was just like, no. During the primary, I was like, Kamala Harris is the worst. Like, of all the people he could have chosen, there is no one that I am less comfortable with. Like, honestly, I can't even imagine if Harris was the nominee. But like you said, in a way, she almost is the nominee. And it is just so painful because I could do a whole podcast on how awful Kamala Harris is. So I'm not going to get too into it. But I do want to talk about, one of the things you said, which is interesting, which is drawing a parallel to the Hillary campaign. Biden is calling a lid on his campaign like every morning at 9 a.m. And they've been saying he's in debate prep, which makes sense because at his age, he needs to do a lot of debate prep because everyone's kind of worried about his senility getting in the ways in the debates. I think this election could go either way. I could see either outcome at the end of the day. I think it's foolish to like guarantee anything at the moment. Like, people who are like, Biden's absolutely going to win, they are forgetting what happened last time. I mean, last time it was after that Access Hollywood tape, the infamous grab them by the P word, as Ben Shapiro would say, tape came out last time. Hillary got a lead in the polls that was, and this was in the middle of October, so this was even closer to the election. She ended up with a lead that was about 7 points in the national popular vote in the polls. Right now, Biden is leading by about 7 points in the national popular votes. And of course, the polls narrowed, and then the polls also were overperformed by Trump. So, it's anything could happen. These debates are going to be, I don't know what to expect. I think a lot of people are saying, oh, Biden's completely senile, he's not going to perform well in the debates. That absolutely could be the case. But I have this theory that, like, Biden has just enough energy left, like at 77, that sort of before these big moments, because his speech went fine at the Democratic convention and his debates during the Democratic primary, for the most part, went fine. I do think that people might be surprised at how well he does in the debates. Although he's got 3 of them to go through, I think he might end up having kind of these minor senior moments, but of course the media is going to spin it. So unless Biden really, shits the bed, it's basically, Trump doesn't just have to beat Biden in the debates. If he wants to, win the debates in the spin cycle, he has to blow Biden out in the debates. He has to do so well, because there's going to be media spin where, basically it's like, if Trump wins the debates, they'll probably call it a tie. But everyone will know that really means Trump won the debates. And then if it's a tie or if it's close, then they'll say Biden won the debates. So, I personally, if I were a Trump supporter, I might be a little nervous, but I think there's plenty of reason to have hope. What you also alluded to, the idea of kind of the secret Trump vote, which I do think is a factor here. I've been wondering about, this is something Brett Weinstein and Tim Pool have talked about. If there is sort of a silent majority, maybe a secret Trump vote that aren't responding to pollsters. I could see that going either way as well. I could see that not being the case, but I could definitely see it being the case. And I think that would be the most interesting result, frankly, is if Trump overperformed the polls by even more than he did in 2016. What that would tell us is people are actually picking up on how crazy the left has gotten. And I think the states that I'm going to be watching most closely are the swing states of Minnesota and Wisconsin, because there have been big riots there, in Kenosha and in Minneapolis these past few months. And I've been wondering if we might see an outsized Trump overperformance in those states, because frankly, if anything was going to get me to vote for Trump during this cycle, it was going to be those riots. So yeah, it's going to be a bumpy 5 weeks. I would tell everyone not to really lock in their results. We've got 3 debates. We have a vice presidential debate as well. And, last time, it was like a week before the election when the Comey letter came out saying that they were reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails, and that really hurt her. Could have cost her the election. So, yeah, this thing could go either way.
Honestly, I wonder if Biden's going to try and get out of the debates, because he never, because
I was wondering
Joe
that
Rogan,
for a while.
Yeah, because Joe Rogan was like, oh yeah, I'll host a debate between you and Biden 4 hours, and what did Trump do? He said, I'm down, basically.
I want to see that.
Biden didn't reply, right?
Yeah.
So, and he could not do it off the without his all his people helping him. I just don't think he can really think on the fly like that.
No, and
honestly.
oh man, what I would give to see Joe Rogan and Donald Trump, or to
Oh my
see Donald
gosh.
Trump and Joe Biden on Rogan. And I think there's like a 50-50 chance Trump goes on Rogan anyway before the election. I'm really excited at the
I
prospect.
hope.
And I've been saying if Trump is reelected, I guarantee you by the end of his second term, he'll go on Rogan. And that will be really, really
Yeah.
cool. But in any case, yeah, for a while I was wondering if Biden would try to weasel his way out of the debates. I feel like at least for the first debate, which is on Tuesday, it's in 3 days. I think it's a little late. I'm assuming he
Never
will
know.
show up. Yeah, you
Yeah.
never know. It could be literally the day before. He's like, well, Trump is a racist and
Got
I don't want to
COVID.
legitimize. Like, that was the thing I thought he would say. I thought he'd be like, I don't want to legitimize Trump's presidency. I thought he'd kind of play that card. But, you know, they've agreed on the terms and I'm expecting him to show up. So
Yeah.
that was something I was kind of wrong about. I actually did think, or we'll see if I was wrong, but I thought the debates would get canceled. I thought there'd be some kind of fuckery there, for lack of a better word, but at the end of the day, it looks like at least this first debate will take place. But there's, in the time we have left, there's just one more thing I want to ask you. It's something I ask everyone on the show, which is, what are, I try to make this show about actually at least a little bit each episode talking about like real solutions and concrete actions that people can take to fight back against woke supremacy. What are the things that you would recommend to people based on your experiences, based on your knowledge, when somebody comes to you and says, I'm a regular person, just in the world. I'm not Joe Rogan, I'm not Dave Rubin, but I want to help. I want to fight this thing. I know how bad it is. And they have all of the pressures that people have. Maybe they've got a family to feed, they've got a job where they're under pressure to be woke and they don't want to lose their job. What are kind of the recommendations you would make to kind of the typical person who wants to do something about this?
Well, I say always build rapport with people and take every opportunity to just talk with someone. Whenever you start off saying like, oh, I'm not with the Democratic Party, or, oh, I'm a Trump supporter, people will immediately tune you out, especially if they don't really know who you are. They don't really know what you're about. You have no rapport with them. So I always say, just like chat people up, see what's going on in their lives, see if there's some common ground that you have, and then, inch your way into asking them about that. But don't be like, I'm a Trump supporter, or I think the Democratic Party is evil and you should too, because then I think people are just going to shut you out. I think that's a natural inclination for anyone, right? If someone's challenging your beliefs, you don't want to listen to it. So, naturally you're going to tune out. So I think it's really just meeting people where they are and not judging them. Even if someone doesn't leave the conversation agreeing with you, just be like, yeah, I'm happy that I had this conversation. I know we don't agree, but I have love for you. I want you to be successful. We're Americans. You know what I mean? And this is why you had mentioned something about identity politics. And I actually think the way to overcome that is to realize that at the end of the day, whether you're green, blue, yellow, whatever, we're human beings, right?
Yeah.
And I think most of us kind of want the same things, in the sense that we want to live lives the way we want to. We probably have families that we care about, and we want to do work that we love. And I think and also we all suffer. It's part of the human condition. If you're a human, you're going to suffer in some way or another. And I think the issue that the left has perpetuated is this idea of the oppression Olympics, of like, oh, well, if you have this, this, and this, if you're like a Black disabled woman, then you win the oppression Olympics, right? So it's like,
Gold medal.
Gold medal, right? But what do you really win? Nothing. So it's like, if we really just think about the fact that, hey, your suffering is different than my suffering, but we both suffer in some way or another, let's, kind of unite over that and be like, okay, well, we're both human at the end of the day. So like, how can our lives be made better by coming together? And I think most of the issues that people have, it's economic more than anything else. It's not really all these other things, right? Most people, if they have money and they can do what they want to do, they're not going to have problems with people. And I think that's like the root of all the issues. And I think we need to just like think about that and solve that together. And then we can just really be a better society.
Sidni, I love that answer. I think it comes down to, like you said, being a human first and treating everyone as an individual. And I think it's similar to, I get an answer like that a lot from a lot of people. So it's something that I think is driven home by people kind of in our resistance cohort here. It's just that if you're going to have conversations with people, it's hard, and you have to know that going in, and know that if you don't build rapport, if you don't treat them as an individual, if you if you don't put some damn effort into it, if you just say like, well, I'm just going to send you a couple links, do what you will. If you don't have a really human and ideally face-to-face conversation with them, it often will just fall on deaf ears because they're all turtled up and they're hardened in their preconceptions. But before we go, Sidni, I want to ask, is there anything you want to promote? That's the last thing. All of your social media and your YouTube channel will be linked in the description to today's episode. Everybody check out Sidni's YouTube channel. Follow her on Twitter. Sidni, is there anything else you want to promote before we sign off?
I would say I also watched the movie Uncle Tom. If you haven't, I watched it
That's
yesterday.
Larry Elder, right?
And it was very good. You know, I'd been hearing it from a bunch of people, so I just want to say listen to his work, and that's it.
All right, awesome. Everybody check out that movie. I haven't seen it, but I recommend Larry Elder's work in general. And with that, Sidni, thank you for being with me. This is Red Pill Nation. I'm Scott Veritas. If you're listening on iTunes, give us a 5-star review. It really, really helps the podcast. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you next time on Red Pill Nation.